My family abandoned me for marrying a poor man, but when my sister's millionaire husband stole $300,000 from them, now they're begging for my help, and my answer left them speechless. I'm 32 years old. I work in marketing for a tech company, and honestly, I never thought the day would come when my parents would call me begging for help. But here we are. What happened a few weeks ago basically confirmed everything I always knew about my family, and I need to tell this story because I still get angry when I think about my mother's audacity in dialing my number after 5 years of absolute silence. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I was a kid and you could already tell that my sister, Victoria, and I were completely different. We grew up in one of those families that look perfect from the outside. You know, big house in the suburbs, new cars every 2 years, vacations in Europe, that kind of thing. My father, Charles, has a consulting business that does pretty well. And my mother, Margaret, basically dedicates herself to keeping up appearances and going to the tennis club. But the thing is that my parents, especially my mother, are obsessed with social status in a way that always seemed ridiculous to me. My mother grew up in a lower middle-class family, and I think she spent her entire adult life trying to compensate for that, as if having money now erased where she came from. Victoria, who's 4 years younger than me, absorbed that mentality like a sponge. Like from the age of 10, she was already asking how much things cost and looking down her nose at kids who didn't wear expensive brands. I was never like that. I don't know why. Honestly, because I had the same upbringing as Victoria, but something in me always rejected that superficiality. I remember when I was like 16, my mother got furious because I invited a classmate to the house, and it turned out the girl lived in a small apartment with her single mother. My mother told me, "You know, Claire, you need to be careful about the friendships you choose. People judge you by who you surround yourself with." I remember thinking, really? Are you that shallow? But I didn't say anything, because at that age I was still trying to keep the peace. College was my escape, honestly. I went to a city 3 hours from home, and for the first time I could be myself without my mother breathing down my neck. I studied communications, made friends from all kinds of backgrounds, and basically built a life that felt authentic. My parents kept paying for my education, though, and my mother took advantage of every visit to remind me that I should meet the right kind of men, preferably future doctors or lawyers or businessmen. Victoria, meanwhile, was in high school being basically a mini version of my mother, buying bags that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and only dating guys who had sports cars. I met James when I was 24, fresh out of college, and working at my first real job. He was 26 and worked in sales for a medical equipment company. I met him at a networking event, one of those boring ones where everyone's trying to impress each other, and he walked up to me and said something like, "This is so pretentious, it makes me want to go eat tacos. You coming?" And I laughed, because he was absolutely right. We ended up skipping the rest of the event and spent 3 hours talking at a cheap Mexican restaurant, and it was the best date of my life, even though technically it wasn't a date. James came from a working-class family. His father was a mechanic and his mother worked at a school as an administrative assistant. He'd paid for his own college with scholarships and part-time jobs, and when he told me his story, he did it without a shred of shame or self-pity, just as facts of his life. I liked that. I liked that he didn't try to impress me with material things, but with his work ethic and his plans for the future. It was, I don't know, refreshing to be with someone who valued the right things. We dated for 6 months before I introduced him to my parents, and honestly, I should have kept him a secret forever. The first time James came to dinner at the house was an absolute disaster. My mother interrogated him about his job, his family, his income. She literally asked him how much he made per year. It was mortifying. And when James answered honestly that he made a decent but not extraordinary salary, I saw my mother and Victoria exchange looks. My father was more subtle but equally condescending, making comments about how sales was an unstable job and asking if James had plans to do something more ambitious. After that dinner, my mother called me and said, "Claire, honey, that boy is very nice, but he's clearly not for you. He's not our level." And I responded, "Our level? Mom, James is hardworking, honest, treats me incredibly well. What more do you want?" And she said, "Someone who can maintain you in the lifestyle you're accustomed to. Someone with a real future." I hung up on her. The next 2.5 years were a constant battle. My parents tried to separate me from James in every possible way. They'd invite me to family events and dinners where there happened to be an eligible bachelor, son of some business partner of my father's or grandson of some friend of my mother's. Victoria joined in the attacks, telling me I was wasting my life with someone who could never give me what I deserved, that my children would have to go to public schools. The horror, according to her, that I'd regret it when I had to clip coupons. The absurd thing is that James earned perfectly well. We had a nice apartment. We went out to dinner. We traveled. We weren't in poverty or anywhere near it. But for my family, if you didn't have a $500,000 house and a luxury car, you were basically destitute. James handled it all with a patience that still amazes me. He never responded with anger to my family's slights, never pressured me to choose between him and them. He just kept being himself, kind and hardworking and absolutely confident in what we had together. He'd tell me, "Claire, I know this is hard for you, but I'm not going to change who I am to impress people who value the wrong things, and if you can accept that, then we can get through anything." And he was right. When James proposed to me after 3 years together with a ring that probably cost him the equivalent of a month's salary, beautiful and meaningful but not ostentatious, I was over the moon. I said yes before he finished the question. I called my parents the next day to give them the news, and the reaction was, well, worse than I expected. My mother literally screamed, "Are you pregnant? Why else would you marry him?" And when I told her no, that I simply loved him and we wanted to build a life together, she said, "This is a terrible mistake, Claire, and we're not going to support you in this." My father took the phone and was more calculated. He said, "Claire, if you're going to do this, we need to protect the family estate. I want James to sign a prenuptial agreement." And I responded, "What family estate, Dad? James isn't interested in your money, and I have my own job." And he said, "It doesn't matter. If there's no prenup, your mother and I won't attend the wedding, and you can forget about any future inheritance." I hung up the phone and cried for like 2 hours. James held me and let me vent, and then he told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Honey, I'll marry you with or without your family's presence, but I need you to know that if you choose this, you're choosing me over them, and that's not a burden you should have to carry." And I told him, "I'm not choosing between you and them, James. I'm choosing between an authentic life and a life of appearances, and I made my decision years ago." I called my mother the next day and told her, "Mom, there won't be a prenup, and if that means you won't come to my wedding, then I guess you won't come." There was a long silence, and then she said in that icy voice she uses when she's furious, "Very well, Claire, but don't come crying when you realize the mistake you made." Victoria got on the phone and said something like, "You're an idiot, Claire. You're ruining your life for a mediocre salesman, and when that marriage fails, don't expect us to take you back." I hung up and blocked their numbers. My father sent me a formal email 2 days later, saying he respected my decision but couldn't go against my mother's wishes, and that he hoped someday I'd understand they only wanted what was best for me. I didn't respond. I married James 5 months later in a small, intimate ceremony with our closest friends and James's family, who welcomed me with open arms and treated me like a daughter from day one. James's mother cried through the entire ceremony from happiness, and his father gave me a hug afterward and told me, "Welcome to the family, Claire. James is a good man, and I know you'll be happy together." And we are. The next 5 years were the best of my life. Honestly, James got an important promotion at his company and started earning pretty well. Ironically, he now makes more than I was making when we met. I advanced in my career too. Changed companies twice and ended up in a management position that I love. We bought a house. Not a mansion like my parents, but a nice house in a safe neighborhood with a yard where we want our future children to play. We travel, we save, we built a life that makes us happy without needing to impress anyone. I had no contact with my family during those 5 years. Zero. Nothing. Sometimes I'd see Victoria's social media. She hadn't blocked me. I guess she didn't care enough. And I'd see her posts about her new bags and her trips and her dinners at expensive restaurants, all paid for by my parents, obviously, because she's never worked a day in her life. She was like 24 and still living at home and letting my parents pay for everything. But well, it wasn't my problem. I mean, I'd chosen my path and they'd chosen theirs. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday afternoon, I was working from home when my phone rang with a Rag number I didn't have saved but recognized immediately. It was my mother's cell. For a second, I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. I answered and said, "Hello?" And I heard my mother's voice, but not the authoritative, controlling voice I remembered, but an almost pleading voice that took me completely by surprise. "Claire," she said, "it's your mother. Please don't hang up." And I didn't say anything, just waited. She continued, "I need to talk to you about your sister. Things are very bad, and we don't know what to do. And I thought maybe you could help." I laughed. I couldn't help it. I laughed and said, "Excuse me? After 5 years of absolute silence, you're calling me to ask for help with Victoria?" And she said, "I know I haven't been fair to you, Claire, but this is serious. Victoria is dating a man who's destroying her life, and we need someone to talk to her. You were always the more sensible of the two." I asked her what was happening, more out of morbid curiosity because I already knew I wasn't going to help. My mother told me that Victoria had been dating a guy named Sebastian for like 8 months, who came from an extremely wealthy family, heirs to some business or other, and that at first my parents were delighted because finally Victoria had found the right kind of man. But it turns out Sebastian has serious problems with gambling and alcohol, like he goes to casinos and loses tens of thousands of dollars in one night, and when he's drunk he becomes aggressive and controlling. The worst part, my mother said, is that Sebastian convinced Victoria to lend him money. Well, my parents' money technically, to pay off gambling debts, promising he'd pay it back. And obviously he never paid it back, and now my parents are out like $200,000 and Victoria keeps defending him and saying he's going to change. My mother said, "Claire, your father and I don't know what to do. We've tried to reason with her, but she won't listen to us. You know how Victoria is, she's always been stubborn, but you have a good head on your shoulders, maybe if you talk to her." I interrupted her and said, "Mom, do you remember when you told me I was ruining my life by marrying James? Do you remember when you threatened to disinherit me if I didn't make James sign a prenup? Do you remember when you didn't come to my wedding because you considered my husband not good enough for your family?" My mother went quiet and then said, "Claire, this is different. This is about your sister, not about us." And I said, "No, Mom, this is exactly about us. About how you and Dad valued money and status over everything else, including the happiness and well-being of your own daughters. And now it turns out the rich man you wanted so badly for Victoria is a disaster. But you can't admit you were wrong about what really matters." My mother started crying, something I'd never heard her do, and said, "I'm not asking you to forgive us, Claire. I'm just asking you to help your sister." And I told her, "Victoria called me an idiot when I married James, said my marriage would fail and not to expect them to take me back. So why exactly should I help her now?" And I hung up. James came home that night and found me still processing the call. I told him everything, and he hugged me and said, "How do you feel?" And I honestly didn't know. Like, part of me felt a bitter satisfaction that my parents were finally seeing the consequences of their superficial values. But another part of me, I don't know. I felt sorry for Victoria because, despite everything, she's still my sister. And she's clearly in a horrible situation. 2 days later, my father called me. His tone was completely different from my mother's. More humble, almost ashamed. He said, "Claire, your mother told me you talked, and I want you to know I'm very sorry about how we handled your marriage. We were wrong about James and about what's really important. And if I could turn back time, I'd do it differently." I told him, "Dad, I appreciate the apology. Really? But why now? Why after 5 years?" And he admitted, "Because we realized we were right about the wrong things and wrong about the right things, and now we're watching Victoria destroy her life for a man who only wants our money, and it's our fault because we taught her to value wealth over character." He told me that Sebastian had accumulated more debt using the credit cards my parents had given Victoria, and that now the total losses were close to $300,000. That they'd tried to cut Victoria off financially to force her to leave Sebastian, but she'd threatened to never speak to them again if they did, and my parents were afraid of losing her completely. Dad said, "I don't know what to do, Claire, and I know I have no right to ask you for anything after how we treated you, but you're my daughter and I miss you, and I just want to know what you'd do in my place." I thought for a moment and then said, "Dad, 5 years ago, you and Mom told me that if I married James without a prenup, you'd cut me off completely and disinherit me, correct?" And he said, "Yes, and it was a terrible mistake." And I said, "Then you already know what to do with Victoria. You give her an ultimatum. Either she leaves Sebastian and gets serious about her life, or you cut her off financially, just like you cut me off." Dad went quiet and then said, "Claire, that's very harsh." And I responded, "Harsher than not attending your daughter's wedding? Harsher than not talking to her for 5 years because you didn't approve of her choice of husband who turned out to be a good, hardworking man? Apply the same standards, Dad. That's all I'm saying." My father sighed and said, "I'm going to think about it. Thank you for talking to me, Claire, and I'm truly so sorry about how we handled everything." We hung up, and honestly, I didn't expect to hear from them again. But I was wrong. A week later, in the middle of the night, like 2 in the morning, my phone exploded with calls and messages from my mother. I didn't answer the calls, but I read the messages, and they were basically her furious, saying that I'd ruined her family, that I'd given horrible ideas to my father, that because of me, Charles had now cut Victoria off financially, and Victoria had left the house and wasn't answering calls, and it was all my fault. The last message said, "I hope you're happy, Claire. You destroyed the relationship between your sister and your parents just like you destroyed yours. You're a selfish person who only thinks about herself." I showed it to James the next morning, and he just shook his head and said, "Your mother is incredible. Really? You give her the same advice she applied to you, and suddenly you're the villain." I blocked my mother that same day. I haven't heard anything more from my family since then. I mean, it's been like 2 weeks. I don't know what happened with Victoria. If she left Sebastian, or if she's still with him, or what. I don't know if my parents maintained the ultimatum, or if they caved like they probably will. And honestly, I don't care as much as I thought I would. What I do know is that James and I are planning to start trying for a baby next year, and that our children are going to grow up in a house where a person's value is measured by their character, not their bank account. They're going to grow up knowing that real love is unconditional, not something that gets withdrawn when you make decisions your parents don't approve of. They're going to grow up seeing a marriage based on mutual respect and shared values, not on social status. Sometimes I think about how things would have been if I'd given in to my parents' pressure, if I'd broken up with James and married some rich family's son they approved of. I'd probably have a bigger house and a more expensive car. But would I be happier? No, definitely not. Because James sees me, knows me, values me for who I am, not for where I come from or how much money my family has. That's something no amount of wealth can buy. The irony of all this doesn't escape me. Like, my parents were so worried that James was a gold digger that they didn't see that the rich man they wanted so badly for Victoria was literally a gold digger with addiction problems. They were so focused on appearances that they couldn't see people's real character. And now they're paying the price for those distorted values, literally paying it in hundreds of thousands of dollars. Part of me feels sorry for them, especially for my father, who at least had the humility to admit he was wrong. But the other part of me, the part that still hurts from not having my parents at my wedding, the part that carried my family's rejection for years, that part feels a bit vindicated. Not in a vengeful way exactly, more like a validation that my instincts about what really matters in life were correct. As for Victoria, I don't know what to say. We grew up in the same house but absorbed completely. Different messages. She totally bought the narrative that money and status are the most important things, and now she's learning the hard way that isn't true. Do I feel sorry for her? Yes, a little. Do I feel responsible for helping her? Not really. She had her chance to maintain a relationship with me. She had her chance to support me when I chose love over money, and instead she chose to be cruel and condescending. Consequences are part of life. The strange thing is that now, at 32, I finally feel completely at peace with my decisions. For a long time after the break with my family, there was this little voice in my head asking if I'd done the right thing, if maybe I should have been more flexible, if I should have tried harder to maintain the relationship. But these last calls, this crisis with Victoria, showed me that my parents haven't fundamentally changed. They're just scared of the consequences of their own actions and values. The other day, James and I were having dinner, and he asked me, "Do you think you'll ever have a relationship with your family again?" And I thought about that for a while and told him, honestly, I don't know. If they really changed, if they really understood and accepted that they were wrong not just about you, but about how they value people in general, maybe. But I feel like what they really want is for me to help them clean up the mess they created without having to do the real work of changing their values. And James said, well, the door is open if they're ever ready to do that work, but in the meantime, we have our own family to build. And that's exactly what we're doing. Building our own family based on real love, not conditional love. James's parents are incredible grandparents for our future children. They already have the guest room full of toys in anticipation. We have friends who are like chosen family, people who support us and celebrate our successes no matter how much our things cost or where we live. I guess in the end, this story is about choosing your own definition of success and happiness instead of accepting the one others impose on you, even when those others are your parents. It's about understanding that people who really love you will do so unconditionally, not just when you make the decisions they approve of. And it's about recognizing that sometimes the family you build is more real and more valuable than the family you were born into. Yesterday, I received an email from my father. I didn't open it. It's still in my inbox unread. Maybe I'll open it someday. Maybe not. For now, I'm focused on my life with James, on my career, on our future plans. My mother probably still thinks I'm selfish for not helping with Victoria. And maybe a part of me feels guilty about that. But I remind myself that I didn't create this situation. I didn't teach Victoria to value money over everything else. I didn't lend $300,000 to a man with addiction problems. Those were decisions my family made, and the consequences are theirs to handle. This sounds harsh maybe, but it's the truth. And after years of trying to earn my family's approval by sacrificing my own happiness and authenticity, I finally arrived at a place where my peace of mind is worth more than their validation. James tells me that's growth, and I think he's right. Sometimes self-love means establishing firm boundaries with people who hurt you, even if those people are your family, especially if those people are your family.